Okay, so what we're going to do here is just a very brief configuration review of setting up your environment for capturing all network traffic out of our Flare virtual machine and ensure that all traffic goes to our REMnux virtual machine. Okay? Before you start, it is okay to have REMnux up and running, but please do not start up Flare until you have validated that everything is set up properly in REMnux first. Okay? We can verify the settings for Flare at this time. It's always a good idea. I have VirtualBox running here. This is my FlareVM, and when I check the network settings for my Flare, it shows that both my NAT adapter and my host-only adapter have the cable connected checkbox clear. Both have the checkbox clear. What they're saying here is that the cable is unplugged. The virtual cable is unplugged from the virtual network adapter for both adapter 1 and 2. Basically, I don't want my virtual machine plugged into the network until I'm ready for it. Not only for this configuration, but in general going forward. Okay? Now that I'm sure that Windows is not going to try and connect to the internet, I can now verify my settings are correct in REMnux. As you can see here, it should be zoomed in enough for you to see, my ENP0S3 is working. It's running on my NAT adapter, but my ENP0S8 is not configured properly. There is an option up here to mess around with our network settings, but it doesn't really work well. Unlike unlike Kali, which did have this set up properly, not so much with REMnux. So we need to go in and manage it. As I mentioned in class, this is done by managing the file called etcnetplan. Well, this file here, 01netcfg.yaml, and as I mentioned in class, the .yaml, the .yaml or .yaml, they're called YAML files, stands for just another markup language. Okay, and it's basically an indentation similar to what we saw when we were doing our Python programming semester 1. Okay, so we need to modify this network configuration file. As I've mentioned many times, Debian, Ubuntu, and the tools that use it are in this transition phase when they're going away from the old IF commands and the interfaces file into the new IP commands and the netcfg YAML files. So we have to kind of ride that transition until the dust settles. For the implementation of REMnux on this version of Ubuntu, we are going to use the YAML file here. So first off, you can sudo nano etcnetplan and then hit the tab again because there's only the one file, or there's actually value in sudo -s becoming and maintaining a status of root. I am root, perfect, and then I can nano etc and etp for plan, tab, and then tab again, and it will auto-complete for you. Once you are in, there's two different ways to do this, and I'll show you both of them. You can use a static IP, but let's start with a dynamic IP. You can say ENP0S8 : enter 1 2 3 4 for that one, 5 6 for the next one, DHCP4, yes. All right, and you can hit enter again. Control O to save. How did I do that? We see it right here. All right, Control O, enter, and Control X. It should work. Now we can reboot and see what happens. IP adder, and it has grabbed the first dynamic IP address available. So everything's working as expected. That's perfect. A better solution, however, is probably to set up a static IP. Now, we've talked about this before. When you have two adapters, you really can't specify two different gateways. So when you research this and you implement what is researched on the internet, it talks about setting up a gateway address when you specify a static IP. Setting up a gateway address here will probably cause problems. We're not going to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this up to a static IP. Again, this is optional. I do encourage you to do it, but it is optional. So become root, modify your YAML file. I'm just using the up arrows. I had to become root before I could find the nano command, and it's pretty straightforward. Instead of saying DHCP yes, we say DHCP no, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 again. We have to specify an address, and it's actually addresses. You have to specify addresses even though there's only one that's going to be, and you specify them inside of square brackets. Assign a static IP from the range of static IPs that you set aside in your DHCP configuration. All right, I'm going to set it to 192.168.56.20, and I'm going to specify the net mask or the network size, just like that. In case you're wondering where I got that from, when you go and you take a look at your network manager, it shows DHCP and range 101 to 254 with the server address being 100. The upshot of this is that all the addresses between 2, because one is already claimed, and 99 are available. Everything between 2 and 99 are available for static assignments. Now I could have set my address to 2. All right, I could have made that 2. I like to leave a little bit of a buffer. I like setting the network address at 1, and I start grabbing static IPs at around 20, and then I start grabbing dynamic addresses around 100. I'm not the only instructor at Red River who does this. Other instructors do it as well, so let's maintain the tradition. Okay, so normally you would then 6 spaces again and do a gateway 4 address like this. Okay, and I just realized I missed a colon. You need a colon after each of these. They're name value pairs, so you need to have name value pairs, and if the value is a list, you put that list inside of square brackets. Okay, that's why this is in square brackets. If you wanted to specify, I think DNS servers also need to be inside of, or name servers also need to be inside of square brackets as well. Now normally you would set a gateway address and it would be 1. Again, the address of the network. All right, you would normally specify a gateway address. But we already have a gateway here. All right, EMP0S3 gives us our gateway management. If we do it again here, we're going to mess with the traffic. So we're not going to do that. We're not even going to specify a gateway address. We're just going to leave it like that, where we've got ENP0S3 defined with DHCP, and then ENP0S8 specified as a static IP and a net mask or network size. Once I have that, again, I can write out Control O, Enter, Control X, and reboot again. Okay, and now that my REMnux has successfully rebooted, I can verify my static IP address. I do this with the IP adder command. And now we can see that I have successfully, let's zoom in so you can see exactly what I'm doing, ran the IP adder command, and it shows that I set my static IP, which is what I want to see. Okay. So now that I have my static IP set up, I can go in and take a look at setting up my network settings for my FlareVM Windows virtual machine. Okay, again, I have two adapters, and both of them are unplugged, virtually unplugged. So one other thing I'd like you to keep in mind as well. Traditionally, when we set up the promiscuous mode, we set it to allow all, so that not only can we talk to, not only can the VMs talk to each other, but that we in the host environment, in our case Windows, can also talk to those VMs, should the need arise. We're not going to do that this time. We're never going to shell into that environment, and in this case it's Windows, so it'll be RDP. We're never going to RDP into that Windows machine. Now, this is our example here. In industry, should you be responsible for doing malware analysis, you might have your testbed set up inside of an EXSI server running on the network somewhere, and at that point they will spin up VMs for you for your analysis, and you may RDP in at that point. But for what we're doing here in VirtualBox, we are merely using the terminal connection that is built in to VirtualBox for us to access our VMs, and that's really all we need. Okay, so we can set the promiscuous mode to just allow the VM to talk to other VMs. We're not going to let it talk to the host environment, and that might help mitigate some of the network traffic going forward. So I'm going to click on OK on that after I verified my network. After I have verified my network settings over here, I can now spin up my Windows FlareVM. This will take a while, so I'm going to pause it. So now we've restarted our FlareVM. It did take a little bit of time, so I'm glad I kind of paused the video recording on this. So our old password is what I set in place here. And now I have my FlareVM up and running. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the network to ensure that this Flare communicates only with REMnux. So, to set the networks properly inside of our FlareVM, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can click on the Start menu, type in network configuration, or connections, I guess it is, connections, and it'll bring up the View Network Connections settings in the control panel. But I find the easiest way to do it is to, on the status bar in Windows, right click on the network icon. In this case it shows that there is no internet connectivity. If you move your mouse on top, it will say there's no internet connectivity. But if you right click, open network and internet settings, select Ethernet, and then change adapter options. This is usually the best way I find to get into it, and I kind of like that way, and that's what works for me. Now again, we have two adapters here. We're pretty sure that Ethernet adapter 1 is our NAT, and Ethernet adapter 2 is our host only, but there's a bit of a way to verify it, and we should always be verifying everything in malware analysis. I'm going to click on the Start menu, type in CMD, open up a command prompt, and just type in ipconfig. All right, that is the network configuration tool that is available to us in Windows. It shows two adapters, adapter 1 and adapter 2. For me, adapter 1 shows that there has been some network connectivity. It's tried to do some name resolution on the college's admin.rrc.ca domain. Yours may be different, but there's an indication that adapter 1 has already done some stuff, and that should be the case. You should have had that when you set up the FlareVM. It should have gone out and done some stuff. You should see something for the first Ethernet adapter. The second adapter doesn't show anything, and that's just a bit of a confirmation that that is probably my host only adapter. So that's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to use Ethernet 2, right click, select Properties, and I'm going to set the TCP the TCP/IP version 4 properties, or the Internet Protocol version 4. Select it, click on properties, or you can also double click on it. I don't know why my desktop keeps flashing like that. It's a little disconcerting. All right. This is the default configuration. It wants to grab the IP and DNS services automatically. We want to control that greatly. Okay. At this point, you want to set a static IP, and the static IP you want to set is on the same network but not the same address. So this is 192.168.56.20. I'm going to set this to 192.168.56.21, the next available static IP. It will grab a net mask, and that's fine, but the gateway address is the IP address of my REMnux. If I had it at DHCP, it was at 101. Your address is going to be different. You must understand your environment. I set it to static. I'm going to use that static IP address here, 192.168.56.20. The gateway is REMnux. The IP address is something different. For me, 21 is the next static IP. I'm claiming that for Flare. The gateway is the IP address for REMnux, as is the DNS server, 192.168.56.20. All DNS requests and all network traffic will be directed to REMnux, and that allows us to manage all network communications when we detonate our malware samples. So again, set the IP address to something different than you've used anywhere else. I use 21. You should probably use 21. Whether or not you set up your static or dynamic IP address in REMnux, if you have your VirtualBox network configuration set up properly, 21 is probably safe. For the gateway address, it should be the address that REMnux is using. For your DNS address, it must be the address that REMnux is using. Click on OK and click on OK. It's not happy because it still doesn't have any network addresses. Now that it's configured, we can go into our network, we can go into our adapter 2, we can plug in our cable. Click on the check marks so it shows the cable is connected. Click on OK, and we will see some network activity happening here. All right. It's saying that's still not giving me internet connection. Nobody cares. All right. We don't want to give it internet connection, but you can see a cacophony. Just click away. We don't care. We don't want it to. All right. It might still complain, but we can actually see that there's communication happening. Check connection and screw off. Maybe it'll leave us alone. Okay. That time I clicked on check connection and then I closed the resulting dialog box. Okay. Things are calming down. That's pretty good. But we can see network, 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 network. When there's communications, it's back and forth between the two. That's kind of what we want. All of our traffic is going here. Now, as I said earlier, you want to validate. You want to prove everything that you're doing. Unfortunately, I didn't set up Firefox in this. I'll probably fix that in a future one, but right now I don't have Firefox, so I now must embarrass myself and run Microsoft Edge. And I'm going to test this connection by firing up a temporary website over here. To do that, I am going to sudo, we're going to set up that Python 2. We're going to load the module simple HTTP server, just like that. But I want to set it up on port 80, which means I need to do this as root. So sudo Python 2 and load the module simple HTTP server, and we're going to load it on port 80. When I hit enter on that, I now have a web server. I can go back and I can attempt to communicate again with that IP address. Even though it is not only my gateway and my DNS server, it's also going to be the web server I try and connect to, 192.168.56.20, and let's see what I get. There we go. I don't know why my Flare is glitching, but I selected it and hit enter again and it worked. It's probably glitching because of the drive encryption that I'm using on this new laptop. We'll keep an eye on it, but I just selected it and I hit enter again and it resolved itself. And we know it because we can see the activity over here in REMnux. And more importantly, we loaded the 56.20 temporary website in Flare. So this tells me that my network is configured for malware analysis going forward. If you're still struggling with this, let your instructor know, and we can take a look at it either on Teams or in class. The complexity of getting this up and running, however, is probably better dealt with one-on-one in class. Just because there's so much going on, it's better to do this in person rather than do it in Teams, but of course we can always try and do it in Teams as well. That's it. We'll see you next time. Cheers.